Larry Fink is in this group too, and to think that he wants to make a more inclusive world is insane. He's interested in increasing the amount of assets that BlackRock manages, and pretty much only that. So these are the people that are essentially behind a lot of the net zero plans, behind a lot of the other SDG plans that essentially move us from the model, the free market capitalist model into more this technocratic model where every commodity.
The entry of BlackRock into Bitcoin is not what it seems. In this shocking video interview with investigative reporter and independent journalist Whitney Webb, she discusses the plans of the global elite and how they plan to shepherd us towards them.
It's interesting.
She starts by discussing a somewhat obscure trans-ideological society where nation-states collapse and society is governed by corporations and large banks, one of which is the subject of this video, BlackRock.
Okay.
In this interview, Whitney gives us some insight into the plans of the elite, spearheaded by Larry Fink, to tokenize everything, including human beings. The truly dystopian and disturbing truths will all be exposed in the following interview clips by Whitney. Let's dive in to hear from her.
And I think it's part of this broader effort that I mentioned earlier that sort of became pronounced in the early 70s, this whole trans-ideological corporation concept, and that we're really at a point where there are unprecedented efforts to create a system of global governance. And I think the dichotomy that they're trying to make, and I again think it's a false dichotomy, is we can either have the current existing unipolar world order, Western dominated, or have this multipolar world order, which is going to be dominated by the BRICS countries. And of course, within BRICS, the dominant countries are Russia and China. And so the idea, it's being framed even, upon independent media. There's some people that claim that the multipolarity model is better because it's more inclusive and more countries have a voice. But ultimately, the same 2030 agenda, or Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals embraced by the EU and the Biden administration, what have you, are also embraced by the BRICS countries that are supposed to represent a challenge to the Western order. So maybe there's a few more seats at the table under the multipolar world order, but in terms of the world that will come in through it, it's the same as if the unipolar world order continues on its way, essentially, because the Sustainable Development Goals have been developed essentially by bankers. You could describe it, or I would describe it, as a global Wall Street coup, essentially. Well, not necessarily Wall Street, but, transnational finance. Larry Fink is in this group too, and to think that he wants to make a more inclusive world is insane. He's interested in increasing the amount of assets that BlackRock manages.
So far, Whitney has explained that left, right, BRICS, or West, there truly is no difference in the end goal for society. There is no dichotomy. Everyone from seemingly recalcitrant heads of state like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping to left-aligned politicians like Joe Biden are all taking us to the same place. A society where everything from traditional assets to natural phenomena and even human beings is all tokenized and everything is surveilled. She breaks it down further in the following clips.
So these are the people that are essentially behind a lot of the net zero plans, behind a lot of the other SDG plans that essentially move us from the model, the free market capitalist model, into more this technocratic model where every commodity, everything is going to be tokenized. And you've seen Larry Fink in the past couple of days be very open about that following the approval of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, for example, talking about the tokenization revolution and all of this. But there's an effort here to take this, much farther than it's ever been taken before, and to essentially just not tokenize, existing assets or traditional assets, but also create new asset classes like natural assets, all these natural asset corporations that have sort of been in the news lately and have sort of, received some pushback, but there's definitely a lot of efforts underway to essentially tokenize the whole planet, increase the amount of assets in the existing economy by being like, now this lake is an asset, now this forest is an asset, and all of this stuff, tokenize, fractionalize it, and, basically create this insane new financial system that's different than previous financial systems, but everything, including nature and humans, will be tokenized and traded like financial products. And that's essentially what a lot of this is leading to. Geopolitical push and pull between BRIC and the West is real, but I think, at the higher levels, they ultimately agree on the goals. So I don't really think, one is necessarily a true effective challenge to the other. And if you're against the ambitions of the SDGs and Agenda 2030, then you should be against them, regardless of if they're being championed by Russia and China or the United States and the EU. Ultimately, it leads us to the same place, and which is going to financialize and tokenize everything, but also surveil everything to an unprecedented extent, and increasingly uses debt slavery. Mark Carney and Fink and all of these guys, under the auspices of the UN, talked about reimagining the World Bank and the IMF, all the multilateral development banks, for the purpose of basically using debt to finance the SDGs and doing all these things like debt for climate swaps, debt for nature swaps, which are essentially land grab and all sorts of things, framing it as, necessary to save the planet. That's definitely going to be happening. And if you look at Fink himself, he's tried to go away from being the point man for ESG and all of this towards a guy that's saying, like, look how profitable this is going to be for us, and you can have a part of the riches by tokenizing your land and putting it on this platform where it can be traded and whatever. Like, you can have a piece of all this wealth and whatever. I think that's how they're going to try and
On March 21st, Forbes published an article titled BlackRock's $10 Trillion Tokenization Vision, the Future of Real-World Assets. This article, published after the launch of BlackRock's digital asset fund, is yet another reminder that the future Whitney has revealed to us is not as unlikely as it would initially seem. In the same article, Robert Mitchnick, BlackRock's head of digital assets, was quoted as saying, "This is the latest progression of our digital asset strategy. With the benefit of Whitney's insight, one can only be extremely skeptical of what the next progression and final destination of this strategy are. Worse still, Whitney has explained that everyone we previously thought to be potential alternatives are merely different sides of the same coin. The future seems truly grim. Bitcoin, which was originally hailed as a beacon of hope, seems to be on the way to becoming the primary tool of choice to effect this evil. Whitney advises that we strengthen our human connections and offline as much information as possible because there are very likely dark days ahead." What do you think about Whitney's deeply disturbing revelations? To see the latest in crypto news, watch this video here.